What's up, designers? Welcome back to the studio. This tutorial marks the beginning of a new unit called Cuts and Collage. And we're going to address the sort of idea of sampling or citation or borrowing or remixing in a couple of different ways. Some very physical ways using magazines and paint, and other sort of more updated digital ways using both Illustrator and Photoshop to do stuff that might be a little bit like in the vein of Johanna Goodman, sort of commercial. You may have run into her work, not just sort of in an art context, but very likely in sort of world of advertising and marketing. Or maybe you'll be more into local artist and Professor Nick Lampert's work. I'm thinking particularly of his animal machine prints, or maybe his meatscapes. He's an artist and activist, right? He believes that artworks sort of out in the public can affect change socially. Or even maybe an artist like Nyugen Smith. I invited Nyugen to Market High as an artist in residence a couple years ago, and his collage work kind of falls underneath this large umbrella of his larger work that he's producing sort of from within what he calls sort of performing in the African diaspora, right? Where all these images are citations and longings and remembrances to experiences he had as a kid, or even point further back to sort of his ancestral heritage, or point to an imagined future, right? So many different ways we can sort of engage collage, and we'll do it everywhere from, I would say, just like the basics on literally like how do we do it, like the techniques of it, but also imagining like what does it mean to manipulate imagery in this way, and how can we sort of tap into some of your own personal interests and figure out what it means for you to pull a certain type of image or to mix images in a different way. Let's actually get into our very first project, which is kind of a fun one. To do that, you're going to need some kind of an old magazine to just basically cut to ribbons. Well, the first thing you'll do with these magazines is essentially kind of like mark the pages, right? I just made these little bookmarks out of a scrap piece of sketchbook paper, and as I was paging through this old National Geographic magazine, I'm just looking for images that grab my attention. I don't really know what I'm doing yet, but as I find an image of, a bright red car, something about the color red that popped out to me there, or just sort of like an interesting pose. But whatever you end up grabbing, right, it sort of lays a little bit of the bedrock of what your raw materials are. It doesn't mean that all of your ideas have to flow directly from the sort of intention of the magazine. You can do a whole lot of reinvention. You can bring like humor. You can bring cynicism. You can bring critique. You can bring sort of cultural revision. You can bring whatever you want to this collage. But essentially, right now, you're just sort of marking pages that you could imagine doing something with. If that sounds really vague to you, think of it this way. Think about a ground, a subject, and an object. Like, for example, these two images here, right? Old man sitting in a chair, fishing, playing with his, giving his dog a pet behind the ear, or, lady in the park walking her dog. These are subjects, right, that could be removed from a background and put into a different space. A ground, right, would be an image, and this is kind of a horrifying one, just a sea of lizards or iguanas. Just a ground will be a place that we could bring other images into. When I say ground, think background. An object is just sort of like a thing that you might be able to hold or look at, or it's kind of a strange one, right? I have no idea what sort of device this guy's holding here, but that object, right, could be lifted out of its context and reinterpreted. Those three, right, a ground, a subject, and an object, those are just sort of basic compositional pieces that form the beginnings of, many images. And so cut collage is really not just a conversation about, who do I sample from and how do I sample, but it's going to be an experiment for us in how to compose imagery. How to kind of pull certain types of images, how to fit them together, which images work well together and which ones don't. Let me maybe walk through a brief example of something I already found and started working on in this National Geographic. An image here, right, where it's clearly some sort of official White House gathering of probably important people, and I'm going to just start lifting my subjects up and sort of out of their context. The context isn't totally uninteresting here. I could probably learn a whole lot from it, but there's just something really captivating about this audience, right? And so I'm going to kind of take them from their context and put them into a new context. Now I've got a whole kind of audience of members. One of them is sort of interacting with this, pointer that he wants to use. And so the first thing I can do is just sort of recompose or rearrange this scene, right? And I can play with the layering of it. Some of these guys are larger than others, so I can pull them down into the space. I love how everybody's gaze is sort of working downward. There's sort of this mysterious, nothing right here that he's working with. And so I need a subject, or I need an object, right? I have all my subjects here. I need something that's captivating the attention of everybody. I'll go a little further into the magazine, right, and pop out this giant crab here now that is going to enter the scene. And so I've already started to sort of retell this story. It's gone totally out of the context of a very formal meeting and into the context of some sort of humorous science fiction giant crab fighting crowd of people in suits. The only thing that I'm missing here in this scene, right, would be some sort of ground to sort of put them back into. Have fun with this. It shouldn't take you guys tons and tons of time to find images that you're interested in, but the work, right, is in actually doing the cutting. As I was flipping through all these magazines, I found another potential kind of inroad here, people carrying things, right? These two gentlemen are in the process of carrying out some sort of giant fossil, but I've got it in my mind that I may end up removing this giant fossil and replacing it with something else, right? The trick here is to work with a very sharp blade and be really patient with yourself so that you can get out all of the intricate detail. Don't forget that oftentimes there are windows, right, of cutouts where if I'm removing this crab from its object, from the beach, wherever it was, I need to get not just around it, but also any kind of like inside window pieces, right, or tucked underneath the neck or elbow of some of these people. Really go, into all those little areas and refine your cuts for that. And as you sort of get all these pieces scattered all over the place, you're going to need a good way to transport them. For now, what might just be the easiest, right, would be to just kind of tuck them back into whatever magazine you're working with. That keeps them relatively safe. To kind of go back and forth to school. Eventually we'll be remounting these onto a board that's a little bit more rigid. So let's get our first project started, guys. Do some cutting, do some initial composing, and we'll come back in the next tutorial and talk more about how to actually approach these recombinations using all these disparate images. I'll catch up with you guys in the studio.